A wide variety of paranormal items, books, magazines, merchandise stock, and cats. Why not pay them a visit to pick up a gift with a difference? Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective discounts, and download the app available on iOS and Android for only $3.99 to keep up to date with what's coming up at the centre.
Things took an even stranger turn when Ken Webster wrote a message back to Lucas mentioning that he was from 1985. The reply wasn't quite what he expected, but then again, when you're dealing with the paranormal, you never expect the expected. Know what I mean? So, this is the message he received.
You said your time had been 1985. Methought you were also from 2109, like your friend, who did spring Leams boist pray.
The Leams boist mentioned in his message translates to box of lights, or better yet, some kind of computer or communication device. Unbelievably, the story now spans 3 seemingly active timelines. So, it turns out that Lucas wasn't only communicating with the trio from 1985, but it also seemed he was in contact with a second faction in the year 2109. Who'd have thought, woohoo, a party throughout time. I hope someone's brought cake. Anyway, Ken Webster decided out of pure curiosity to see what would happen if he were to use the BBC Micro to write to the future. His message simply read, calling 2109. The reply that came back read,
Try to understand that you 3 have a purpose that shall in your lifetime change the face of history. We, 2109, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. All we can say is that we are all part of the same God, whatever he is. ?
In time travel talk, I think they are asking him to look out for butterflies. So, just to confuse us, the story has now splintered off into 3 different timelines. The 1540s, 1985 and 2109. Not only that, but the individual or individuals from 2109 claim Webster and his friends are involved with a higher purpose. It's hard to pinpoint how many are communicating from 2109, as they always just refer to themselves as they. As I have mentioned earlier, Lucas' real name is revealed to be Thomas Harden in the subsequent messages. Debbie, Webster's partner, also claimed to have visions of him, and when Ken Webster's friend Peter Trinder decides to interfere with the messages, he is warned by 2109 that he's threatening the mission the trio have, claiming that they are involved in an experiment or similar project with a higher purpose. Nick Point says, and I quote, 2109 communicates in a very different tone and language, using scientific terms, but also giving little detail away about their agenda other than their annoyance at Ken and Debbie when, for example, they find out Lucas's real name and 2109 worry that this will disrupt their plans. Unquote. And you thought the storylines from British soap operas were messed up. A paranormal team consisting of John Bucknell and Dave Welch from the Society of Psychical Research were invited by Ken Webster to investigate matters. They did an investigation no fewer than 8 times, experiencing absolutely no activity whatsoever. So they decided to send a list of 10 questions to this entity in isolation from the rest of the household as they were. Then they deleted them. After several days, they finally got a response.
John. David, you interfere with communication. Next time you decide to perform your little experiment, you must be clear from here. We suggest you try someone else to sit with Debbie. Yes, we are what you would call a tachyon universe, but your understanding is correct. We ask nothing more of you than to carry on as you would prefer. We will have John present if given choice, or you may bring another if mentioned. No, it is no concern to us that this is not proved. We will give you a plotting of a star next time. We move at speed so that we cover every point in your time and universe. We have no form. We feed off a neat energy that you will not have heard of. 2109.
On seeing the response, Dave Welch said, and I quote, "On hearing this, 2109 had not answered the questions, but it seemed they had picked up on all the questions left for them in the same order." Unquote. Soon after their investigation, the SPR went very quiet about the whole affair. John Bucknell left the SPR and Dave Welch then disappeared without a trace, and an official report was curiously never filed. According to the documentary Out of This World from 1996, the findings of the paranormal team from the Society of Psychical Research concluded that the phenomena was a hoax. But when the SPR were asked how they performed this hoax, they then replied, "We have no idea how it was done." Unquote. Remember, this documentary was done in the mid-'90s, so I did a little bit more research on the case. Some of the opinions of the SPR were a little, how can I put it, out there. For example, number one, sensitive microphones being strategically placed around the room, picking up the sounds of typing that could then be deduced as the cause of what had been written on the computer. Number two, or using the earth wire of the electricity in the house to send the data through the microphone. Number three, or a 1980s computer hacker living in the village being responsible. Yeah, I think I would do a disappearing act as well, if that's the best debunk I could come up with. As there was no internet back in 1985, Peter Trinder, the fellow teacher and friend of Ken Webster, was their only source of information, and only obtained by travelling to Oxford and researching for information on site. Another message from 2109 suggested finding a gentleman named Gary Ruff.
You may phone him at the number below and invite him to talk with you. When he comes, show him this and ask him what he makes of it. Peter must do the telephoning. Tell him that you got this telephone number from a UFO enthusiast. 2109.
Gary was a UFO investigator. According to Ken Webster, Gary was a sharp, intelligent man obsessed with his ideas. What followed was a strange communication between Gary and 2109 directly. 2109 asked Ken to print off messages without reading them and give them to Gary in a sealed envelope. This strange interaction between them led to Gary becoming almost evasive about their discussions, and then he too disappeared into the night. Ken Webster described this situation as very frustrating, as it didn't put them forward in explaining the strange phenomena. All 2109 had done was use Ken to tell Gary about the future, and now Gary's only concern was keeping those details to himself. More butterflies, I suppose. Eventually, Thomas, or Luca, said that he was being forced from his land and was never heard from again. But he did say he would leave something for his friends in the future. Gary Ruff says, Thomas says he is writing the story of events from his perspective and that he will leave the book where it can be discovered in the future. Gary was eventually tracked down quite recently and interviewed. This is what he had to say. I had the opportunity to investigate these happenings firsthand. No, I'm not some away with the fairies wishful believer. I investigate with professional detachment, not bother what I find, fact or fake. I left no stone unturned and used cutting-edge science to get to the truth. In fact, I believe it was the first computer-controlled psychic investigation recorded in the world, and I don't care two hoots if nobody believes it. I know it happened. It changed my life forever, and it is going to change yours. This book will one day be ISBN recorded under the history section. It is a monumental historical marker in the ribbon of time. In response to this, Nick Point said, 2109 later says that the book will be found at some point. If such a book does exist and is ever found, it would obviously be a compelling piece of evidence. Sadly, no book has ever been found. Yet, a blog post has become a bit of a discussion forum for believers in the story, with UFO researcher Gary Ruff, who investigated the events and features heavily in the Ken Webster's book, The Vertical Plane, and Debbie herself both posting periodically. Nick Point says, it is clear that many people, including Gary, believe that the story is true and that proving this is unfinished business for them. So, theories and opinions. I'm the first to admit I believe in ghosts, spirits, UFOs and all sorts of other cool paranormal stuff. But that doesn't mean to say that I would walk into every abandoned building and assume it to be haunted. I also like to keep an open mind and go out of my way to debunk wherever possible. When I first heard about this case, I, like most paranormal investigators, got quite excited and read and watched everything I could about it. I mean, that's what we do, don't we? I was intrigued about the footprints in the dust. I have seen this phenomena several times over the years, including handprints on windows and mirrors and paw prints appearing in talcum powder right before my eyes. Also, the idea of a spirit or entity using a computer as a conduit to talk to people is still within my technological comfort zone. I mean, let's face it, it isn't the only time that a spirit has used modern technology as a form of communication. Nowadays, most ghost hunters use K2 meters and the white noise on spirit boxes, and there are lots of apps you can now download onto your mobile or tablet. And of course, there is EVP, electronic voice phenomena, of which I myself have caught countless times on good old-fashioned tape recorders. There is even a couple of books regarding countless episodes of spirits using telephones to contact the living, which have left scientists, parapsychologists and skeptics all scratching their heads. I will look at doing an episode about the EVP phenomena another time, but it's worth having a read of the following books. Phone Call from the Dead by D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayliss, or Telephone Calls from the Dead by Callum E. Cooper. I suppose the only time I became sceptical is when the communication from 2109 started to transpire. To me, it started to feel a little bit more sci-fi or horror rather than a documentation of actual claimed events. And what about this book that Thomas is supposed to have written? To this date, it still has not been found, although, according to 2109, it will be discovered one day, before the year 2109, presumably. Ken and Debbie had over 150 messages throughout this ordeal, so let's face it, when or if this book is found, it will be a cracking read. It's also interesting that some of the words that Luca used wasn't translated until a much later date, as recent as the 2000s, due to the internet now making it easier for scholars and the like to have access to the information. Ken Webster's book, The Vertical Plane, wasn't written until a few years after the event. So it does seem odd that if you're going